you, Nick.
Thank you, Jessica.
So Nick Caruso is joining us from CABE. And he's going to walk us through the board self-evaluation.
Thank you, Nick. I've known Nick for a long time. He's a senior staff member there. Patrice is on some, I think, Greek cruise or something like.
Send the picture, it's swimming in the Arctic Ocean.
Is that what- okay, all right. Thank you, Nick.
It is vacation time, right?
Some extra here if you need.
I know in your schedule, you have lunch at some point. I don't
We're done.
know. Oh, okay,
We're done.
good. Wanted to make sure.
No, we're done.
Hungry people don't focus as much. I sit there every time I hear people talking about new legislation, and let us remember this was a short session, if I'm not mistaken. One of my favorite movies is It's a Wonderful Life. And that obnoxious little girl goes, teacher says whenever a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. And all I think of is every time the legislature meets, an angel dies. But no more editorializing on the legislature. Let's talk about the Darien Board of Education. I would like you to take a couple minutes and just look at the results. I find the comments can be very helpful. We didn't have a lot of them, but somebody took the time to write something down. So and I'm not here to judge you or evaluate you. You did it yourself. So I will ask, as you look at this, I'd love to see some general comments first, just your observations. Do these results look like something you would expect? Or is it any surprises? At the back, you'll see a couple little charts. They're not really scientific, but they do sort of give an idea of a trend in terms of where the board, you feel you're doing your work.
So I'm assuming, Nick, that like if you just read the first one, division, that 4 under 5 represents 4 people chose 5 and 2 people chose
Correct.
4.
So sorry about that. Thank you. So did you get a response from everyone? All 9
We
people?
got 6.
6 out of 9.
Right, and 2 of them came in last night. So we got them in under the wire. So thank all of the.
But only 6 out of 9.
Yes. So, and that's, well, it was 5 or it was 4 as of last night, so we got better. And we had a kind of a short timeline. Usually we try to plan these a little further in advance, but so as I say, if anybody has any general impressions, and then I'd like to just take a few minutes for each of the sections and get your ideas on how you feel.
Go ahead, John.
So I was just, if you go to page 1, 2, 3, again, we have 2/3 participation rate. So
Right.
the data set's a little flawed, but I look at the summation and I don't think it comes much to a surprise. I think there's some not sures. I think I put a 3 in one category that scored low, and maybe I think there's some confusion with, what the question was actually asking. Question. Which one of the lowers? think it was professional development.
Oh,
It's a
21,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah. So that didn't get any 5s or 4s, you know, got a lot of 3s. I think I put a 3 in there because the board participates in professional development specifically regarding its roles and responsibilities in relevant content areas. We do officially, but maybe I'm missing something.
Well, I guess what we're asking is, does this board avail itself of opportunities for professional development related to board work?
Okay.
I think I'm guessing I gave it a 3 because I did answer that, and there's nothing higher than a 3.
Yeah.
I will say I have taken advantage of a few seminars offered by CABE in the last year that I found incredibly helpful. They come into my inbox. I often miss them. I don't know that we do a lot to promote them among ourselves, or that admin is promoting them to us. I think there's more available to us than we're taking advantage of it. I did one on
That's kind of the way I
communications,
answered it,
and I
yeah.
did one on civility. Like, there's some really interesting stuff if you can make the time, but I think it'd be great if we as a culture encourage, are more encouraged or more engaged in taking advantage of that stuff.
You're governing a learning environment, and so sometimes the best way to govern is to continue learning. And we, especially since COVID, I mean, a lot of the work we do is online, so you don't even have to leave the comfort of your home or office. And even the in-person ones, we have our summer leadership program coming up in August. Our new board members / leadership training in December, which is good after elections to have your new people participate in that. As well as your seasoned board members, because we're splitting that. In fact, we're very excited. We're going to partner with Franklin Covey to do a pre-conference workshop on that day for board chairs and superintendents to talk about the board chair superintendent relationship, and we're pretty excited about that. But some of it's institutionalized, some of it is just taking advantage, and we do try to make sure you hear about all these things. But we definitely encourage that. Jill?
One of the things I think that we could talk about as a board is how to report back when one of us does attend. So it made the most sense that you went to the comms one. I was so glad you did, but we don't really have an agenda item for you to say, here's what I learned, so.
We did it in committee, but yeah, we can do it more broadly than that.
Or the civil discourse that doesn't fit inside of a committee. I think that one of the things we could talk about is when there is something valuable, is there a way to get it to the board table? We have that committee reports, which has a more formal function, but I would throw out there, maybe.
I think if there was I like the conversation. I think to me, it's a little bit similar to the subcommittee reports, but maybe there's a way to capture who's going to what, like Julie saying, hey, I'm going to attend this, or I'm going to that, or I'm doing this online thing, and then have it as part of a monthly or quarterly, just have it as an agenda item, whether someone attends something or not. If there's a brief update they want to bring to the table, I mean, it's a good way to capture it. It's like, from a professional business standpoint, you capture your community service hours to go toward your organization's goals from a community service standpoint. It'd kind of be good to capture that, what everyone's participating in.
And not that most people do it for that reason, but when you attend one of those workshops, you get certificate points. You're not certified as a board member, but you're certificated if you reach enough points. But you get credit for those classes that you take, and sometimes that comes in handy later on down the road. We hit level 1 or level 2, level 3. It's been a long time since I was a board member, but when I went from level 1 to level 3 in 1 year, I was really excited about that. Spent a lot of time in professional development that particular year. And the other thing that's, I think, a huge advantage is you get to meet people who are struggling with the same things you are from all across the state. You were expressing frustration with some of the legislation, as we all do. But when you can start working with other people around, very different community, but I know the Bridgeport Board of Ed has gotten really frustrated with the legislature, and they're really trying to, as a board, become more actively involved. And each of your communities has a voice. And, you know, if the Darien Board of Education takes a position on upcoming pending legislation, your local legislators, if nothing else, should be taking notice of that. And it doesn't hurt. And, you know, I'm not here to talk about Kay, but we're here to talk about you. But if this can help, we have a very active government relations committee that during the session, and we team up with CAPS on a lot of this stuff. You know, we are actively fighting legislation we think will harm districts, and we are actively supporting legislation that will help districts. And those are all voted on through a resolution process. It's not some group of faceless, nameless people making decisions about what they're going to support or not. There's a formal resolutions process. There's a delegate assembly where the body votes on those positions, and then our government relations committee and our state relations committees take action from there. So there's I recognize distance is sometimes a problem. It took me longer to get the last 3 miles than it did the prior 20, I think. But a lot of it's online now, so there's lots of opportunities to get your voices heard.
The other thing we have is we have 2 CABE reps who could be taking a more active role in sort of reading those missives as they come through and, you know, highlighting them. But Alan, can you take as an action item sort of how we want to fit this into the agenda, some sort of reporting back? I know, you know, we always send people to the Cape Caps convention, so at a minimum, that would be a good starting point for hearing back on some of the professional.
Well, it can also be an opportunity to advance notice things that are coming up as well as reporting back.
Yep.
So anyway, I started kind of at minutia, but you know, you asked for a general feedback, and that was one of the things that just cleared out as I reviewed this document.
So now, am I correct that there's a strategic plan in draft form, or is that it's?
No,
or is it
we're
year
in,
3. I couldn't tell. I thought I saw the word draft, but then I saw year 3. So, and do you find yourselves referring back to that during your meetings when you're doing your work?
Yes.
Which is why you have so many 5s and 4s in that first vision.
I think, you know, the community leadership and the communication score is a little low. We've called that out. You know, we created both a curriculum committee and a communications committee as a result of some community feedback. And so we're still, that's a work in progress. That doesn't surprise me. And it's part of the survey feedback we heard from the community. Collaborating school boards, you know, Duke does, but I give that a low score just because I don't have the opportunity to do that. But I know Duke is on a kind of communications with number of chairs.
where is that, John? Is that in board operations?
I'm sorry, I'm jumping
Communication.
in community leadership. I'm kind of
Yeah.
jumping around there.
Page 1, number 11.
Yeah, I mean, on 11, and I, you know, it's a matter again of potentially sharing it, but there's a superintendent email chain, and sometimes I reach out to Rich or Alan or Marge for a response. I mean, you know, the latest request was someone up the line was renewing a super contract, and they wanted to know what everyone's terms were and salary ranges, and some of that stuff is published information anyhow, but and sometimes it has to do with a new board chair or something like that.
Yeah, we have an email
Yes.
list, and yeah,
Yep.
I wanted to make sure you're on it.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and once a month or have a conference, have a call with all the board chairs, so. Yep. I think overall, you know, board operations, I think we continue to focus on how we work together as a board. Kind of leads toward, you know, working together, but always more work to do.
Yeah, I mean, that one, as it was already mentioned, the sort of 2 points were 20 and 21 in particular, where self-evaluation, well, actually, that one was 1 and 3. But involving yourself in PD and also being part of our association, for example, having someone serve on our board of directors or
Yeah.
try to be active.
I think some of it, some of that participating in professional development, participating in with organizations and stuff like that, going to conferences and stuff like that. It's time and energy. I mean, the work that this board does on a regular basis is incredible from an hour and a day-to-day participation. I mean, there isn't a day that goes by where almost the leadership team, Sarah, Jill, and I are not in some conversation, with the administration or ourselves. So, and I think a lot, people don't, outside of the board, don't necessarily realize the time and energy that people put into a board of ed in terms of the day-to-day. So then, taking another day off, whatever your responsibilities are to do some of this stuff is a lot. You could conceivably, use up 5 PTO days during the course of a year to participate in stuff that really would be beneficial. So, and I think we've done a good job over the years of dividing and conquering who goes to what, Jill's gone up and testified, and we've written letters. I do think it's your comment about Bridgeport. It's interesting when you hear the legal update from Jessica, and is there an opportunity as what I consider a leading district for us to participate more at the state level and use ourselves as an example of what we do right fiscally, what we do right in terms of investment in education, investment in infrastructure, how we run a budget, how we work hand in hand with our other town agencies, whether it's the Board of Finance or, the first select person too. So, I think that's stuff that in some ways, I think when I listen to that legal update from Jessica, if all boards banded together in the state, maybe we could be more effective in pushing change or kind of saying stop and time out with some of this stuff. Like, so easy for them to legislate down without really understanding, or they're professional politicians, most of them, but, not realizing the day to day, when you sit at a PPT for a student and there's 14 people in that room, and those people, half of those people are pulled out of classrooms or offices. I mean, we're doing the right thing for the student, but that's an incredible amount of time over and above the 1.5 inch thick packet of paperwork that's associated with it. There's no reality check between the state and the day-to-day, what goes on in terms of educating our students and what it takes.
They did
to
create a
educate our
task
students.
force to look at unfunded mandates and look at what might be, not that they will probably ever take any of the recommendations from the task force, but they've allowed.
It's an easy way to kick the can down the road by creating a task.
Just study it to death. Yeah, and I mean, today's a perfect example. From what I'm seeing here, you started at 9 a.m. and you're going till 6.
We've
maybe.
all taken a day off from our lives because we're all
I
committed.
mean, I was lucky. I was self-employed. I didn't have to worry about boss, but I had no income coming in all those days.
Sure.
And I actually, when I was learning how to do spreadsheets, I was keeping track of my hours in board meetings. And when it would be 20 hours a week sometimes, and that was without the CAPE stuff, which I started to add on too.
Easily.
It was a glutton for
Easily.
punishment. And we all recognize that. And again, whatever happens in Hartford, you're adding an hour or two each way to that time. Because if there's a meeting in Hartford, you've got to get there, you've got to come back. So we
Yeah.
all recognize that.
I think on board ethics, I don't know if there's any additional conversation anyone would like to have. That's kind of leaning, that's, more on the 3 side in terms of board ethics. I think a lot of that, some of that has to do with how we communicate, when we communicate, and I know it's stuff that we're working on. Sure, Katie, please.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if there was actually a code of ethics. I was only aware of a conflict of interest.
I took a quick look at your website and I didn't see one. And you have some policies there, but I didn't.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I referred to the policies and when I thought of answering that question, but there wasn't like a code of ethics, if you will. And we don't sign anything that way.
Yeah, there
Unless I'm
is
missing
a
something.
model available. We have one that boards will often, or, and sometimes make it their own. They'll change some things around that or subtract things. And then Some boards, I know a couple where every year, the first board meeting of the new school year, they'll all actually vote to reaffirm it. Just so that people know ethics is important. It's a small public relations activity, but it's a way of letting people know, hey, we acknowledge this. There's no ethics cops, unfortunately. So it's all honor system, but it can be helpful.
Marge, I have a vague recollection of talking about this like 6-7 years ago.
We talked at this retreat about code of ethics. We talked at board meetings about code ethics.
Oh,
So I think there's a model policy, we're just not at the 9,000 yet.
There is a model policy around
Yeah.
it, code of ethics. Yeah.
Alright, so it's
Okay.
coming.
Oh, you're working on it now.
I'm
Use the
sorry.
model policy, it will.
Is there
come-
one?
So As we go through,
Got
we'll
it.
get to the 9,000.
Okay.
The board, yeah.
Yeah,
But there is
9,000
one,
9,000
there
is
is-
board operations.
There is one in there,
Not at all.
It's,
We have the civility policy that talks on
right?
board
Yes.
operations, but not
it's not
ethics.
yet.
Well, as I say, when that time comes, there are samples available, so you don't have to start from scratch.
It's not the same, but it's close. We also have the district values that we embrace, and that applies to all of us.
Which, if I'm remembering correctly, sorry, I just jumped in there. I think those haven't been re-voted on since 2019 or something.
No,
I don't know if
that's
that's-
they're part of the strategic plan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to what's on the, in our roles and responsibilities. My bad.
Anything else on board ethics?
What I did see was that from what I'm reading, that you're very comfortable, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but you're comfortable as an organization in the way you operate.
Mhm.
You know, getting stuff done appropriately, focusing on the right work, those types of things. It seems to be, from an outsider looking in, that those are the kinds of things, and that's where you are strongest when you can do that.
Mhm.
Excuse me.
We try.
That's all you can do.
I think the one thing that, and I think, you know, as people come on the board, they realize this, and there's always challenges. People have opinions and views, and but you know, it's interesting. Question 26 and 27 too. I think, you know, one of the things that we can reinforce at kind of onboarding someone onto the board, or it's interesting that now there's board training that's coming down from the state standpoint, is that, you know, you really have to come to the board without a personal agenda. And we really should try. I always say when I started at the board, I couldn't tell you who was on what political party. Unfortunately, sometimes now it's pretty clear who's on what political party. And unfortunately, I'll say it here because it's a board evaluation, and but we have let politics creep into the board, unfortunately, and there's no place for it at the board. As I always say, if we true up back to we're here to focus on the student, then we will do good work. But this, you know, individual agenda approach in bringing politics to the board is not going to help us on a go forward basis. All the way left, all the way right, personal agendas, personal relationships outside of the board. It's not going to help us in any way. It's actually going to take away from what we're doing and how we're doing it. This board does phenomenal work, spends an incredible amount of time working together, and we've come a long way. But I see creep here that's incredibly uncomfortable. It's disturbing. It's not right. And it's going to do nothing but hurt kind of our end game here, which is focusing on our students. And I'll leave it at that.
So if I could just.
Sure.
When I think also the pressure that we've been under, you know, going through COVID and some of these just social issues that have crept up, you know, on a statewide basis and beyond, you know, I often find we're argued through by the public also.
Mhm. Good
So,
point.
you know, we get put into a pretty difficult spot. You know, again, it's almost like, and you hear it in the communications. I wasn't gonna stand up and say anything, but I'm responding to so-and-so who said something earlier. And again, it wasn't even a board member, it was another community member. So
Right.
yeah, I think, you know, yes. And we have to check ourselves on some of the issues that you raised Duke, of course, but also, we've been, I didn't sign up for this when I signed up, 4 years ago and dealing with COVID. And I'm not an angel on any of those fronts that you mentioned, so I'm not trying to say that. But I think we also have to reflect how hard, at least my, the last 4 years have been between COVID, the new administration, everything, I think, and what Alan had to launch into and it, work with his team. So I also want to just recognize some of the difficulties we're facing as a board, and it's not extraordinary. They mentioned some of the books earlier in our attorney review, and the books are same, you do research, it's the same
Right.
books, creating the same waves and the same complexities. So,
Yeah.
sorry.
No. And I'll add to that too, that, while I expressed what I see are some challenges, if you look back over what this board has accomplished in terms of a new school coming online, incredible amount of time, energy, and work behind the scenes on bringing a new school to life, renovating a new school, implementing technology, implementing new curriculum, dealing with tragedies in terms of teenage suicides, and building community support around what we need to do to support our students. The natural turnover of staff and bringing new folks on board and getting them on board. And we continue, while from a state and national standard, it gets more and more challenging to recruit folks across the whole spectrum of staff. We still have people that want to come work in this district. Marge referenced this morning, getting 100 resumes for a position. That's huge in this day and age to get that kind of volume to come here and teach. So, at the end of the day, we've worked through and have an incredible working relationship with our other town boards that support us in terms of continuing to invest in education. We've had over the last few years a relatively smooth budget process. We continue to look at that to make sure we hear and get the right feedback from the community and especially our parents. But it's proved effective. And from a fiscal standpoint, yes, we push back in a collaborative way, work with the administration to look for efficiencies. There's not an open checkbook here, regardless of where we rank in terms of wealth from a town perspective. I think we value ongoing investment in education, but we also value delivering education in an efficient, respectful way to our taxpayers. And also, you want to get to the point where you want to make sure you have the ability to execute on what you've invested in and execute well. And sometimes I worry that, how much can you take on your plate? And, before you start not to execute well. So I think that's stuff we have to continue to work on. But, as much as there always will be challenges, I'll honestly say it might not be the time or place, but in my time on the board and working over the last couple of years with this board, I'm proud of what we've accomplished against a lot of challenges. And I think we've had a lot of lessons learned that we've worked on. And the key is communication all the way around. I don't think you can communicate enough sometimes. And also I think the other component of it is looking at how do we, communications committee and administration are doing good work on this, but how do we feel? We've got to go back to the community and see how they feel we're communicating. It's a good barometer. And again, we talked about it earlier today, going back first and foremost too, I think, and listening to our students. I think that's key. Dennis, who's not here, always talks about how do our students feel in college about leaving here and going on to college? How do they feel we did in preparing them for school? So
it's interesting.
I'll pause my ramble.
When I came in, you were talking about bullying, and to give you an idea, one of your neighbors, I won't say which district it was, invited their student leadership to come to their policy committee meeting to talk about the bullying policy. And we were there for board training that was going to start after that committee. So I was just sitting listening, and they asked the students, well, what goes on in the schools? The kids bullying each other, and they're trying to get the kids to talk about it. And they said, well, yeah, there's student to student bullying, but we're more concerned about the adult to student bullying. We're more concerned about adult to adult bullying because teachers bully each other, administrators bully teachers, teachers bully students. That's what we're concerned about. And the board kind of just let it go. And so if you ask the question, that's the first part. The second part is making sure they know they were heard. And I thought they lost a really big opportunity that day because they just said, well, we're going to talk about the kids. We're not going to talk about the adults. And I thought it was a lost opportunity. If you can figure out how to bottle good relationships with other city and town organizations, I would love to know how you do that, because when it happens, it's wonderful. Sadly, it doesn't happen, and especially a community like this, because I know when I've worked with the New Canaan board a few times, like, there's so little state money that you may have more community wealth, but you also pay a bigger chunk.
Yeah.
So in the end, it's just as much a burden for you as it is for somebody that gets a lot of state aid.
Yeah.
Jill?
I thought it might be helpful just to sort of go through and identify areas of work and see if people want to talk about it further. Because I think from what I just heard is, we know communications is an area of focus, and we can see that pretty clearly under community leadership. So I don't know if there's anything to add there. Then if I move forward, it looks like under board operations, professional development is a big focus. Seems like code of ethics we're going to do, and that'll be a big board discussion. So I would say we have a place to work on that. And then I think after that, I'm looking at the board superintendent team, and I would suggest that that might be an area we need to spend a few minutes on right now, based on how the numbers are distributed. Are there areas where I think we're going to have an evaluation later today where we could maybe talk about things that belong in the evaluation there. But if there's anything we want to put on the table in terms of how we work as a board, it looks to me like there's some room to work there.
I think you did a good job of hitting on a few of them. Yeah.
So one thing, because I think we've talked a lot about professional development already, but I would remind you that we can always come here. I know it's really hard for, especially all of you individually trying to do different things, but if there's a particular issue you want to talk about, or after the November elections, if you want to have someone come in and talk about board roles and responsibilities, that's part of your dues, that you get that as part of your membership at CABE. So whether it's, that's my main job, is going out working with boards, but we also have our staff attorney, Conrad, who's a young kid, but he's brilliant. He's really, really good. You've met Patrice a number of times. Now that she's our executive director, doesn't get out in the field as much, but I know she's got a special place in her heart for Darien. So, I mean, between she and I, we'll have you covered no matter what. But, if it's about convenience, we will do what we need to do to make it easier for you. So I would just say that.
To that end, Nick, where it says the board follows the chain of command as identified by board policy. What is that referring to? Because
Well, typically, and again, depending on your policy manual, they'll typically say something about like, chain of command is if a parent calls with a problem, for
Right.
example, refer them back to the teacher. If the teacher wasn't helpful, refer them back to the principal. But that the board member is never part of that chain of command unless the board, because we do have to kind of remember, and I have to remind people all the time, individually, board members have no authority. It's the corporate entity known as the Board of Education that has authority only in meetings. And so there's a place potentially where a parent or a teacher might have a complaint or an issue that they need to address, and the board is the final arbiter or one of the final arbiters of that issue. And if they haven't gone through the process, it makes it very complicated. So reminding ourselves not to circumvent the superintendent or go directly to the superintendent, which leaves the principal out of the equation, whatever. But that's really what it's kind of referring to, whether your policy manual specifies that or not. But one thing we keep trying to do at CABE is remind people that you govern through policy. So that's the appropriate place to try to codify your expectations, whether it's behavior, it's educational value, or whatever.
Good. Katie.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick, for clarifying that. I will admit that when I read that, that was not the intention in which I answered the question. I had assumed that that point was asking about internal communications. So just a couple of points coming back, which I think a lot of them do come down to communications. As the newest member to the board, I would say that in terms of operation, development, training, I would encourage that to happen sooner than later. I think, given we know when elections are, and a lot of times we know if there's potential for new members or not, it would make sense to have that set, just before even the elections are finalized, because sometimes it is the case, as it was for myself, elections on Tuesday, there's a meeting on Wednesday. So I would just urge timeliness on that matter. And then also coming back to community leadership, which I think has a lot to do with communication. I know this came up in our survey, but I think it's worth repeating here. I would really like for us as a board to be more accessible to the community. And I know that that can get complicated with certain regulations. There was an idea, I think, that was thrown out in the survey by someone about having office hours or some sort of, kind of prescripted method for people to reach out to board members that was different than what exists. I do think that currently kind of the two methods of public comment and then sending emails don't always work for everyone, because public comment is very public and not everyone is comfortable with that. And emails can sometimes be difficult to articulate in black and white versus, so I think what I'm advocating for are more conversations. And I think that that might be a missing piece sometimes with us in the community, is person to person, like really getting at like, what is it that you're concerned about? And do you understand which roles and who might be able to best address that? So I would, be the first one to sign up for office hours if that was something the board decided to hold. And then, oh, sorry, I'm jumping around now. Just coming back to the board operations, I see, just a couple note. In terms of speaking to that internal chain of communication and some of those more internal policies, I would say that even as someone who came on the board feeling very well versed in the content of discussion, there is a learning curve into how our internal operations work. So, I would think that if there's something that we might be able to develop internally in terms of like how the board works, like I did go through the CAPE training, which was wonderful. But, in terms of, do board members contact the superintendent directly? Does that go through the chair? Does, that's just one example, right? But something that is sort of concrete and written is helpful for new members. And then I also think helpful for sometimes existing members, because when you have been on a board a long time, things can change. So it would be nice to have that level playing field. And I do think with the structure of our elections, we kind of have an opportunity every November to say, this might be a new board and how might we look at things?
Thank you, Katie.
Can I add to Katie's?
Sure.
Yeah, comms has some things on its agenda to look at codifying some things like how we do from a communication perspective. But if there are other things, like I think how we talk about email, we talked about this, what belongs in policy versus what might be just a procedure that we document. So, because I think you're absolutely right. You come on and you're not really sure, and it does change. So thank you for raising that. Related to that though, one thing I think that this board could undertake that would be valuable is just sort of we do get a packet when we come on, it says what's the board, but I think there are just basic pieces of information that every board member should have at hand at all times and not have to go back to the board book to remember exactly how many students are in the high school and what percentage of kids receive services. And I would love to see us just develop sort of I think it'll be more than a page, but kind of a cheat sheet for sitting on the board and what that means. And so I think we could work together I'm happy to compile some, a list of questions, and we could work with administration, but just something that lives so that, when someone gets asked a question, they always have it. And when a new board member comes on, it's easy. And do you already have one in your hands?
This is produced by the state of Connecticut. It's your strategic school profile. And a lot of what you're talking about is right in there. It gets into number of students, number of staff, the ethnicity, you name it, it's in there. It's a wealth of things that you would have at your fingertips, and you can download it for free right from the state website, edsite.gov, I think it is.
Okay.
I believe that's a report I shared around the DEI report.
Yeah, that could be very, very helpful. We have at our disposal a workshop on communication. We actually call it community leadership. It was a module developed for our Lighthouse training, but we pulled it out. We use it in by itself. In its best form, we do it in 2 evenings because part of it is you follow a questionnaire. It talks about your strengths and weaknesses. And then we then come back, talk about what good communication looks like, and then share the results from that first questionnaire with that and have you sort of problem solve where should we put a little of our work, or do we want to develop a communications plan out of what we've experienced? That's something that, you know, is available. I'm still trying to figure out how we're going to do the first part because we used to use the little response clickers, but those don't work anymore. So now I have to come up with a more technological savvy way of doing that. So we're working on that. I will also say, in fairness to all of you who've been going through what we've been going through the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, in November, it'll be 40 years that I've been involved with school boards in one form or another. I can't believe I just said that. But it's never been as hard as it has been right now. It never has. There are people actively deciding that we can fulfill, and this is anybody's agenda. I'm not pointing to anybody in particular. We can influence what happens in schools by going after school boards. And so you are targets now. Boards weren't, maybe here and there, but it was never an institutionalized attack on public schools or on boards of education specifically. But you're kind of an easy target because you're locally elected and it's tough. But so you've got, and there's, I'll say millions, it's probably more than just millions, but there's millions of dollars being pumped into this right here in Connecticut. Even there's been a couple communities where they were under attack, and the communities, the one I'm thinking in particular, the community pushed back and said, not here, we're not going to let that happen here. And they overcame that, but it was a huge cost. One thing I would also say is you have your superintendent evaluation coming up this afternoon, I guess. That's a great place to have some of those questions about how should we be talking to each other. Do you want a phone call every time I hear something? Or should I talk to David first and then he'll be a filter or whatever? Last week I was in Brantford where they have a brand new superintendent, and the board and
We know.
We know.
I was careful I said that. We spent the evening talking about, in a great part, about communication, and so that we don't start out, or they don't start out with any misconceptions about who's going to talk to who or how they're going to do it. And it was a generative process. It wasn't the superintendent saying this is how I want it. It wasn't the board saying this is how we do it. It's like, what's our comfort level going to be? Where do we need to put our emphasis? And it just was, I love meetings like that because it's not trying to fix something. Something right from the beginning. It's a very positive thing.
Thank you, Nick. In the interest of time, because I know some folks
Yes,
have
I
a
know.
hard
We've got a
stop
lot.
at the end of the day. Julie?
To add, to follow up to what Nick was saying, it does seem like the point you're making, which is well made, it makes it that much more important for all of us to know exactly what we're supposed to be doing here and what our jobs are, and maybe is the reason that we should take a harder look at what we do to onboard, or how often we recommit to what our commitment is to this board and to our school district. I understand that the ethics piece is maybe coming up. I have no idea when we'll get to the 9,000 series at the rate we're moving right now. I don't know if that's something that we should be looking at sooner. But I love the idea at the start of a new board seated at the table in November, if not sooner, to have that conversation and commit again, and just be as strong and as certain as we can be about
The
what we're
city of
supposed to do.
Hartford doesn't let a board member take a seat at the table until they've had training, which usually is the last minute. Last year I did, or the last election year, I had to do 3 Zoom calls to train 3 board members because they couldn't, it was Tuesday night's meeting, this was Monday, but we got it done. And, you know, we could put something on the schedule for early December or late November and say, okay, workshop on roles and responsibilities. So it's just a matter of timeliness, but
Yeah.
and my calendar will fill up quickly just because it's an election year, but it's there if you want to take advantage of it.
Thank you, Nick. Anything on board superintendent team, that last section there?
I think we can cover that later.
Okay, good. Julie, I think you had a good summary of a couple of things I think from a board perspective we can take away and work with.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Can I repeat it?
Sure.
So on comms, we pretty much have identified the work. I don't know that there's more to add there, but we know it's a priority. Professional development, we talked about doing more, reporting on it and doing it sooner in the process, particularly when we have a new board member. I think we talked about the code of ethics and making sure that gets, the appropriate time and attention in a timely manner. We'll talk more about the board superintendent team in evaluation later. And then we talked about taking a look at the information that we provide new board members and just making sure that that's as robust as possible and accessible to all board members.
I don't know if you've seen our new board member packet that we,
Yes.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah.
Probably
I'm talking
too
about the local
comprehensive.
data more that makes you,
Yeah.
so you, in addition to that, there's other.
Yeah, the
data
profile is a
things.
great little tool. I keep one in every folder for every district.
Yeah, but like the master agenda and the,
I think too, I'll play on Julie's point a little bit. I think it's not a bad idea to kind of true up on an annual basis as to what our role is as board members. I feel, while there's a lot of gray and that's fine, I think we, a team of 9 works well together with the administration. But I think if we true up on an annual basis, tie it to, which then helps tie to the board and the district's goals and objectives for the year. I think it also helps to, my word, stop the creep of the board wanting to get into the day-to-day management of the district. All right. And I feel that. I feel there's creep of the board wanting to get into the day-to-day management or decision-making. And I think that's something we need to discuss as a board and as administration. We may need some help with it to have that conversation, but I always chew up to, I'm not a professional educator at all. All right. Have I learned a lot? Do I know a lot? Is there a lot of practicality to what we do? Yes. But at the end of the day, we hire the team of incredible professionals that have spent their lives educating themselves and getting doctorate degrees to run the district. At some point, you have to realize their role and what they bring to the table. All right. And we are never going to be, as a board, the experts on curriculum or any of that other stuff, without relying, on the expertise of, the folks we hire to run the district. So I think it's a good, I'm just playing back to Julie in that there's kind of you kind of renew yourself on an annual basis with the new members. And then I think that also helps with, I think sometimes we struggle with these goals and objectives, but if we always chew up to the student, letting the professionals do their work, us being at a certain level in terms of asking the right questions, monitoring, looking for the metrics, to see that what we feel needs to be accomplished is, again, for our students, I think it keeps us in the right place in terms of board leadership.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. Katie.
Just one last thing to add. I promise to be brief. I just want to make sure that we make the distinction in terms of onboarding and training, that there is a difference in the state level versus the local. I think that's an important one. You guys have a lot of regulations. That's great, but sort of that internal piece. And then last, I just want to highlight that while I do think it would be great for that annual review and that piece with the whole board to come together, I also just want to advocate that I think for new members, there is value in some one-on-one time. For example, the sitting with the cabinet members, those conversations change greatly when there is an existing member, especially one who potentially has been there for a long time. So I do think that we should respect the new members' time as well as having an opportunity to have conversations that aren't guided or led by other people.
Good. Thank you, Katie. Nick, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yes, go ahead.
is an action item on your last point of
Yeah.
that point of roles and responsibilities. Are we adding that to the yearly agenda? Is that-
I think
is that
so.
what We're doing.
Yeah.
Alan, can you take a look at an appropriate time to put that in the master agenda on a yearly basis?
How does that differ, just help me, how does that differ from what we're doing right here, right now on an annual basis?
We don't ever explicitly go back to the roles and responsibilities and review what's in them.
That's
As
fine.
an agenda item.
And then maybe when we have ethics, we would add that to
Yeah.
that review. And it would probably be about a 5,
Yeah.
10-minute
Yeah.
agenda item.
I think it plays into our kind of professional development.
It's good on the comm side, on the outside. This is what our role and responsibility as a board
Yeah,
member.
good. Nick, thank you for coming down. Thank you for putting the work together. Appreciate it. Take care. Have a good rest of your summer. Thank you. Thank you. We will. All right. We'll move on to further discussion of draft board goals and strategic plan year 3. Thank you, Michelle, for being on the board up there. There. You good?
Yeah. just give them
Yeah, good.
So. Didn't see him there.
What's that? Oh. Hello, Jeff. That was good. Michelle, we don't have, I wasn't sure. Dennis, I think he was going to try and make it back on. So good. Thank you, though. Sarah, you're on for as long as you can be on. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Ben. Sure. Are we good, Jeff? or-
Yes.
Oh, we are. Okay, thank you. So with the board's understanding, maybe we'll just go through the board goals update and the update to the strategic plan. What we did here is we took the feedback from what was said prior and the feedback from the board at the last meeting, and we tried to incorporate that where we thought it made the most sense. We haven't left anything out specifically. So if there was a specific thing that you thought that the board wanted in here, either as board goals or the part of the strategic plan, then obviously we can have that discussions. For convenience sake, I just highlighted in yellow what the changes were because I thought that just might be easier for everybody. So I won't go over everything, but some of the highlights I'll just touch upon. So goal 2 was around the budget. I thought we could combine those two things and leave the budget and things that we're trying to do in there and align and support the district priorities to the budget. That's what I heard. That's what we thought we heard at the board at the last time to align those
Michelle,
things.
could you just scroll that up a little? Is that possible? Yeah. No, yeah.
Go
You
back
went to the next
Could you
page.
just go back down, please?
Goal 2.
We're goal 2. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle.
On the right-hand side, we put in the measures of identifying. Some things may have been said, and I thought, is that part of it, not part of it? And it made sense to put it part of it. I put part of it. So to sort of identify the grant funds to be included in the 24 through 28 budgets. If you recall, we're going to roll out budgets, looking at long-term. So we would pull out those grant-funded positions and include them in there. And then the whole digitizing that. Digitizing the documents to reflect alignment across the district where we can possibly do that. I'll pause there or I'll just go on.
So can we, is it best, and I go by a census of the board here, do we want anything we want to talk about with respect to goal 1, regardless of the fact that nothing's been highlighted there? Okay.
I'm good on that.
All right, good. So Julie, you had your hand up.
On goal 2, it's a little thing, but in the measures for goal 2, identify grant funded positions, should we include programs there also? I'm thinking of robotics and how that
Yeah.
became something we had to
Good-
fund after.
Good
the
point.
fact.
Yeah, good point.
Yes, the only thing I would say there is that potentially covers all those bases is the second bullet.
Yeah, I want to talk about,
Do you know what I mean?
you talking about the 5-year budget projection?
I'm talking about, yes, the budget book will apply the 5-year budget book for any new personnel and or programs or
Right, but
clubs.
I think to Julie's point, I like to
Flag.
flag
something.
that on some of this new stuff like you did with robotics, we're happy for you to go look for outside/grant funding. Yeah, Katie.
But I would say that, in the spirit of this, that
Yes.
it would be great that anything in grants is flagged. Like, for example, this year during the budget, when we were having a conversation around Teachers College and Unit of Study, we kind of found out later that there was funding for professional development that was in a grant. So pulling all those things out, I think will just help us have a more complete picture.
Good. Julie, I'm sorry. Did you finish?
No, I did.
Okay, good. Gil.
Did we capture it or not though, Julie? Have we captured it or
I
not?
think identify grant funding programs/positions.
Yeah, positions and or programs, I think.
And then Katie, does that cover kind of broadly what you're thinking about? Okay.
And then from the finance committee at least on an annual basis or year-to-date basis, Rich always highlights the grants and what the balance is on some of these grants too.
Right. So Rich, what just real high level, real quick. So, we kind of always went through in my time on the board, we always went through that 5-year projection exercise. Sometimes we talked about it, other times we didn't talk about it in depth. So where we're headed now is to align more with Board of Finance and RTM, what they want to understand about what our budget looks like, being as real as possible, knowing some of the stuff the district is looking for in terms of new initiatives, knowing where we're thinking about adding staff, or knowing that, like now the SSOs need to be in that 5-year projection going out. So is there anything that you could talk about at a high level that you're implementing, changing, or doing that change it? Yeah.
So I think in the budget book for the upcoming budget, fiscal 25, we'll have a tab in the budget book called multi-year projection. And it'll look pretty similar to what you see as like the superintendent's recommended budget. And it'll just start with, the current year, superintendent's recommended, and then 3 years out as a projection. And then you'll have like an FTE column, that'll say plus or minus, whether it's enrollment based or if it's a potential flag of a new initiative or whatever it might be. And so that'll give you that 5-year outlook. That'll be part of the actual budget process. So you won't necessarily vote on the multi-year budget because you're only voting on 1 year, but you'll at least get to see what the impact is.
And that projection will incorporate as much as we know, what we know contractually,
Yep.
your estimates from fuel and utilities, and then.
So since you're going 3 years out, there's always going to be contracts that you don't have settled. So typically what you would do is take whatever the last year of that contract, so if it's the teacher's contract or the administrator's contract, whatever that last year is, you're just going to carry it forward as if it wasn't last year. And then obviously you have like a footnote that says this is assumption is that the fiscal 25 is the last year of the contract will continue through 26, what could change.
And you'll make as best as you can assumptions on, I don't know whether it's realistic to do it or not, but you'll make as good assumption as possible on healthcare costs and stuff like that.
Yep. So we'll make assumptions on renewal rates and we'll look at, what was our trend for the last 3 years. We'll apply that going forward and kind of see what that looks like as well.
Does that accomplish what?
I think so, and especially what the known incremental expenses
Right.
that flush in. Typically, it's, you only know 1 or 2 outside of contractual obligations. You're only going to know.
Yeah, I mean,
one or
obviously, the
1
further
year
out you
ahead.
go, the less accurate it's going to be because the
Right.
less data points you have. So the idea would be you'd have your current year, your superintendent's recommended, and then 3 years post that.
But in
So
that
this-
case, some of the curriculum, sorry,
Go ahead, Joe.
in that case, some of the curriculum, new initiatives that we put in would also be reflected, making the assumption that it gets expanded by additional grades if you put in a foreign language and that sort of thing.
So do we need to be more specific in that bullet? It says budget books reflect 5 years. Should we just say budget book will reflect current, proposed, and 3-year
In 3 years
projections?
post that. Yep. So you'll have 4 total unapproved years ahead of you plus the existing.
Okay.
Could I just make sure who's, some member of my team here taking notes on this, because I'm.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
4 plus.
So the difference between, I think, what we've done in the past and we got away from was the 5-year, just that we, the major topics, personnel, fix and so on, we projected those out, but we're talking about projecting out at 8, correct me if I'm wrong here, in our discussions for HRC is what we're doing. So it's a higher level of detail we're asking for here, right?
Yeah.
Which is what we're suggesting we're doing.
Yep. We did kind of like a straight line. We kind of fell back into just a straight line projection if we grew 4.3.
Yeah. So we have 1,047 accounts in our system. We'll forecast out the 1,047.
But I think, Rich, the board, the district, and I think our partners, in town are very comfortable with your financial reporting, your financial projections. So I think this plays into exactly what I think everyone's looking for to give that forward-looking view. The only thing, this came up in a recent conversation, and I know there's a lot of changes and we're going to have more discussions at the board level about HHR. But have you done, and going off path here a little bit, but have you re-upped the capital projections in like we were just talking about scuppers and water and stuff at the high school? So, or do we have a very clear 5-year forward-looking
So for
overview of
for the
capital?
most part, we do, and you'll see a couple things like, fall in and out. A lot will depend on HHR, that's 3 or 7
Sure.
schools, and then Oxbridge, you're not really expected to have anything coming up really soon. So
Right.
4 year 7 schools should be taken care of. You are going to see a lot of needs grow at the high school and the middle school. You're going to need new roofs in the next 5 years. Those are going to be big ticket priority items. There's big ticket paving items at the high school that you saw in outer years. And then depending on what happens with the libraries, those would be big ticket items as well.
I would ask too that spend enough time roaming around the district, but I would ask that you make sure that I'm fearful of deferred maintenance. All right, so I would ask that you and Kevin and whoever else is part of the team, and if we need the facilities committee or whatever to do it too, but just really do a thorough assessment of, I feel there's deferred maintenance. All right, as much as we get kudos when people come in and say what great shape our buildings are, I've been around long enough, and to the conversation we had earlier today, I think there's stuff out there we need to address.
So you are coming up on that 10-year mark from that last major study that was done by KG&D
Yeah.
in 2015
Right.
that looked at a lot of the maintenance projects that have to go on. So you are going to have to see a need for that. It'll be a little bit scaled back because you're not really going to look at Oxford and the 3 HHR buildings,
Sure.
but it's going to have a primarily focus at the secondary level.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And that's coming in it's because it's not in the strat plan because that's year 4.
Would be year
timeline-wise.
4. I mean, we do have something in there specifically for the middle school to look at those needs, because that is the one school that probably needs the most attention after HHR is complete. But then you'd have to look at the high school as well right after that.
Can we add, because you are looking out through year 5, can we just make sure that it's robust in the strat plan that we can see both the middle school and the, thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. Are we good on, go ahead, Dr. Bradley.
Okay, goals 3, the feedback on goal 3 was not necessarily to change or otherwise, but to try and to review, build in an annual review process. It was just the change of the words for, I think it was from revise to review, basically, is what we were talking about. Does that capture it? Oh, I will say, by the way, there was comments about the values and so on. Well, the values, how we do all this work, the values sort of like crosses over all of what we do and how we do the work. So that's how we build in the values. So goal 3 and well, actually goal 3, 4, and 5. Other than that one change, there were no other changes. That
Should we be more specific? I just throw this out to the board on, I think the board needs to spend more time on this because I think it's a living document that should kind of change and evolve. If you think about everything that was just brought to our attention from updates at the state level around stuff, that should we be more prescriptive and engage in an annual review process? I'm almost thinking that doesn't keep us informed enough about, how we're moving forward with the strategic plan or what changes we may feel we need to implement. Although the measures are provide quarterly updates, so maybe that covers it. That just popped into my head. Julie?
I was just gonna, and I know that we asked for this, but I was gonna ask if we know what that looks like. I mean, on the one hand, the strategic plan should be high level enough that it wouldn't change dramatically despite changes in legislation, et cetera, to my way of thinking. But I do think, and again, recognizing that some people had more involvement in the creation of it and in the, more fluency with it than others, that it probably is, if we're going to do this, work together, it would take a good bit of time and need some careful design. So I'm not sure how we do that best, but I just feel like there does need to be some discussion about how that work gets done.
Julia, are you talking about bullet 2? The
I'm
highlight?
talking about, yes, the highlighted one in goal 3 right now, how we're going to do and what the annual review process is going to look like, how we'll do that.
So this may not be like an answer that you're looking for, but what we are actually doing right now or have been doing this sequence of meetings to talk about revisions to it and so on is a review of it. That
Is that review? Okay.
That's what I'm like.
Well, and like from our last meeting to what we're looking at today, getting into more specificity as far as the education goals go, that's fine. So if that is the case, let's just make sure
Well,
that
that's
we're
my
all
understanding of it,
recognizing
in
that
case-
that's what's happening.
Yes.
Thank you.
I will say too, by the way, we heard from some candidates, one of the things that makes our district attractive are the guiding documents that we do have and that we do honor. It comes up all the time in candidates, not just who sit before the board, but sit before me and interview committees that, anyway, just for perspective. Chairman, I don't want to just pass on, but if there's no.
Anything on goal 4? Good. All right.
One more. So, you mind just advancing, please? No, could you just go to goal 5, please, of the board? Thank you very much.
Anything there on goal 5? We're good. I'm asking the board, Michelle. Thank you, though. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think so, because next year it would be probably oversee elementary building projects and begin plans. But this year, I think it's just the building project.
Okay, so with that, I would think the board might just take us into consideration at the next meeting just for approval. We'll just move forward. Thank you. So that's something the same just for the strategic plan, just so that we could move forward discussing it. So I tried to make some highlights here in yellow. Probably worth touching base on them. And
We moved on to the strategic plan. Good. Go ahead, Joe.
would you like to pause at 1A, or do you want me to go to the highlights?
Anything on 1A? All right, go ahead, Alan. 1B.
So 1B, we built in the universal design for learning and what we learn, how we learn it, and how we go about that. We changed the EduPlanet, which is upon consideration of it, that was FY27. I thought it was long. Amy pushed back a wee bit, right? But we're landing on here, and I'll shoot for excellence here, and hopefully we get very close to it. I mean, that's kind of what I'm looking at.
So Amy, what was your pushback? You need the time to go out to 27 or?
Just
Really just because I'm looking for more time with department chairs to look systemically PK-12 and to see really what the articulation is across departments. I think some departments are much more ready to commit to that early date than others. But I think the bulk of the work can be done by that time. It's just going to require a more articulated plan. And then as we know with the new legislation, there will be impact to curricula in the different areas. So that there just will have to be some flexibility for our district to respond to those things. It's like the financial literacy course.
Right,
Right. So that's really it.
I'm not, I mean, 27 seems like a long time out, but in the whole scheme of things, as time flies by, it doesn't. I would rather focus on execution and doing it right and making sure, everyone has the resources and the time they need. So.
I agree. And I would draw our attention, just to give an example of the pace of curricular work, especially if you think of middle school, right? That's a 3-year, very short, quick turnaround. So if you're extending curricular work over and out many years, kids enter and exit an entire grade level band or school experience without really receiving the impact and benefit of that. I agree with Dr. Alvin. We need to shoot for excellence and comprehensiveness and just
Right, and then tie that into reality of, can you execute on that date?
right.
All right. Exactly. I mean, to me, it's about executing and executing. I'll say it flawlessly. I mean, there's going to be bumps in the road and stuff like that, but any of this type of stuff, again, it goes back to, we don't have it in front of us. Some of us are good at this and others, but it's like, what's the project plan? And does that timeline meet a realistic project plan, to implement this out and have the people, this is over and above everyone's day jobs. So that's what, gives me pause about bumping dates forward, like 2 years, basically. So,
And particularly, the department chairs play a really critical role in this work. And
Mhm.
so I've been able to meet with several of them. They're not here all summer, but I've met with several coming in, and I have a few other sit-down opportunities to meet with them one-on-one and really explore what has been accomplished so far.
I think it almost, from a board perspective, like an update as to, you've met with all the department chairs and see if this continues to be realistic.
That would be appreciated.
Okay, good. Jill?
Based on what we heard today, I think 1B is the closest place I can find for it, but it looks like we need to look at our early learning kindergarten years in particular, with the changing of the kindergarten year and the focus on play-based. So however you want to write it, I think that needs to show up here.
That's a good, yep.
I agree.
I'll probably that is the best place for it. If it's not, we'll find another place, but that's probably a good place for it.
Katie?
Thank you. Just a point of clarification that in this goal, when it says units of study, that's a general term, not actually referring to the curriculum named that. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification, for sure.
Good.
So 1B, we lifted the units, the pilot, the 8th grade units to be built into EduPlanet for extended learning opportunities for students, and this came from the talented and gifted program. So this is one that we lifted, and this is one that we specified that. And yes, we are doing it simultaneously as we're writing it here a little bit. I'll be explicit with that. And that was the only changes for goal area 1, unless there's other ones.
C? Anything in C, 1C? I don't have a color copy, so. 1C, we're good. All right. 2A?
So 2A, you'll see here also, one of the things I was trying to do was flag potentially some budget considerations. I'll say that nothing up here locks the board into anything. Okay, so there's no subliminal, you put that in, therefore you're going to have to do it. And that's not happening. But if there's an area where I think potentially we're going to explore for future budget, because the board asked me to do that. So instead of doing it sort of separately as an item, I've sort of built it in a little bit here. So you'll see that says review secondary school needs to support school climate, wellness, teaching and learning. And so there's a possibility of potential personnel changes that may come down from a secondary level. I will say that through this, there's a focus on the middle school and the needs of the middle school. So I anticipate just at this early date of coming back in November to flag further that we may have positions to look at there.
Jill?
So in reading this, Alan, just might just be a typo, but that's happening in year 3, correct?
Yes, that's
For
happening.
implementation in year
Right.
4.
Yes, yeah, that's it. Yes,
So the conversation would be starting.
So it's years 3.
because it's
4.
for the 25 budget.
Okay, so then when I look above, develop a wellness training program model, is that something you're doing this year for implementation in 4, or is that something you start development in year 4?
That was for a year, for another year, right?
You'll start development in
Yes.
a year. Okay, so we wouldn't see any
Correct, yeah.
strategic work this year coming up. Okay.
Good. From board perspective? 2B?
So where is so reports in on the wellness center, that comes in under that bullet, review secondary school needs?
Where are, yes, yep, yes.
Okay, so I'd like to see some measures there. We already know we're putting in kids in crisis, and we know we're putting in the wellness center. So I'd like to know what we're looking for.
Where is that falling?
This is
here?
that yellow one, the review. So part of the work this year.
It could be around, I don't know how specific you want me to get, because, or for instance, the middle school, I'm looking at, do we have enough support services in there? Do we have enough administrative services in there? Right? I don't know that I want to lock all those types of discussions in there just right now.
Understood. It might be that you want to actually write another item under action, but something that captures the fact that we are actually doing quite a bit this year with the rollout of the Wellness Center and Kids in Crisis, and that part of that rollout does include additional review of resources.
I think you should break out secondary school versus what's being done at the high school. Then you can tie the metrics or the learnings or the feedback on the rollout of the Wellness Center and the Director of Health at the high school. And she's coming back to us to give further recommendations or learnings about what she sees the needs are of the high school, of the middle school. Shirley? Yeah, thank you.
I
Do we
just
wanna
want to make sure there's a
separate?
consensus of what the board's asking me for, that I understand that what the board is asking me for here.
Do we want to break out and see specifics to how things are going at the high school? Yes.
I mean, however you want to write it, but I think it's important at the end of the day that when
Sarah,
we're
drop
looking at
off.
this again, we can see, some reports back on the Wellness Center, I think is a big initiative.
Yes.
And as is Kids in Crisis. So it needs to be visible.
So you want to delineate year 3, what we're doing this year, and then.
Yeah, however you want to.
Okay, okay.
Oh, okay. All right, okay.
It's the way John said, probably, yeah.
We detail what you're doing in year 3 already. So then whatever's not done, that's going to be your review for year 4.
It sounds like you're asking for an evaluation of the things that we put in place in years, right?
We're putting this somewhat, but some of this is going into place in year 3.
Yeah.
Because year 3, which is will be this coming school year, is the Wellness Center expansion and Kids in
Right,
Crisis.
I just meant that like the decisions were made. You're talking.
In year
Yes,
2,
yeah.
yes.
Good.
You get that? Okay, thank you.
2B.
Okay, so this particular measurement was added to prioritize recommendations from the diversity and equity report and develop implementation plans of ELP through grade 12. So where we left that off is the administration has to review that and come back to the board. That's where we left it off.
So,
Go ahead, John.
so under action, I would change the word implement and review considerations of DEI team. And then in that review, you're going to be identifying the prioritized recommendations from diversity and equity inclusion report.
I would move away from the word implement.
Yes.
Yes, Julie.
I was gonna go in another direction. This feels like a lot more planning and talking over the next 3 years without doing, and I'm craving
Can I
action.
just get, I know the sense of what you were saying, but just
I just changed the word implement. I would suggest using the word review considerations of DEI team report.
yes, that's fine. Yes.
And because as I understand it, these were considerations, not even recommendations. So then you rightfully say, identify, prioritize, identify, I would say then, prior. So I just caught this. So then I would say, identify, prioritize. No, I'm sorry, prioritize considerations.
Yeah, that's fine.
like
Prioritize
that.
identified considerations.
Yeah, something like that.
Or just
Yeah,
prioritize.
I know the sense of what you want.
You guys are clear.
I got it.
So just to clarify my point, I'm on board with all of that language. It's the end of the